I think there's a lot of women who look successful on paper, but they feel completely depleted, empty, exhausted inside. Why do you think that so many of us fall for this hustle trap? And how can we start to break free from this?
We live in a world that says ambition is more for more sake all the time.
Hmm.
It's more money, more power, always stretching, always moving the goalpost. That's the piece that is really dysfunctional.
I wish that you had existed when I was in the throes of my career.
There's all these internalized messages that we have about ourselves and around taking up space that often initiates an impulse to work even harder.
How can ambition thrive in those environments so that we're focusing on community over competition?
There is a lot of bias in those professionalism standards that causes us to water ourselves down, to code switch. And so much of the time, that watering ourselves down, the trying to make ourselves palatable actually ends up making us sick.
The world is going to stop spinning if I take some time off. There will always be more shit to do. All right, Amina, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here to talk about something that resonates with a lot of people that listen to the show. I would say the majority of my listeners are badass, ambitious women who are becoming cycle breakers, who are building businesses, building career paths, building legacies. And often, what I'm seeing in conversations with them is they're exhausted, they're burnt out, and they're like, I feel like I'm not doing this right. So I'm really excited to talk to you because you have a very personal connection with this topic and you have a new book that I'm so excited to dive into. But first off, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm always so happy to be in the house with another Jersey girl. I feel like we just, see the world the same way.
Yes.
So I'm Amina AlTai. I'm an executive coach, a speaker, author now as of May 13th. I wrote a book called The Ambition Trap: How to Stop Chasing and Start Living. And I am a Scorpio for those who love human design. I'm a 1-3 manifesting generator. And my work is equal parts mindset, well being, and career strategy because I feel like we need to look at all three pieces with the same diligence to really thrive. And I wrote a book on ambition because I'm a highly ambitious person who coaches other highly ambitious folks and just really saw what a struggle it was for so many of us to achieve our dreams, but to do it in a way that was good and kind to our bodies and the rest of the world.
Mm. I think it's a little more than just you had a wake up call. It was literally life or death, right? So you
Yes.
found yourself days away from organ failure because of your relentless pursuit for success, right? So kind of
Yep.
take us back to that moment. What were you chasing and what is it that snapped?
That is the origin story. So I was 6 years into my marketing career. And, I'm the child of immigrants and was taught to keep your head down, work really hard, don't make waves, have the great on paper life. And for all intents and purposes, I did. I had a great job. I was making great money. People liked the work that I was doing, but I was working so hard with zero self awareness that I burnt out and I developed 2 autoimmune diseases. And it
Wow.
happened in this very dramatic fashion where my doctor called and said, if you don't go to the hospital instead of going to work, you'll be days away from multiple organ failure, which is so wild, right? To be like 28 and to get a call like that is just wild. And but I needed something that was loud, right? The universe whispers and then it shouts, and I hadn't been listening to the whispers, and so I needed a shout. And I'm so grateful for it now, 15 years on, almost 15 years on, because it really changed the trajectory of my whole life. I was working so hard, had no boundaries, was deeply codependent, all the things, right? And it
Mm.
almost took me out for good. And it was after that that I went on to study coaching and mindfulness and somatics, and then just felt so much better in my life. I wanted to teach it onward. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I can resonate with that. And I think a lot of listeners can too, just feeling like the weight of your family's legacy and the sacrifice and all of that can drive you to really want to just go hard, go ham, as they say, and like accomplish everything that other people couldn't do. Do you think that your immigrant background had a role in kind of feeling that pressure?
100%. I watched my dad have a really tenuous relationship with work in the world. He's a brown man named Muhammad who finished his training overseas. And, I just watched him have to like really sort of like fight and push to make his space in the world and working really long hours. And, I definitely picked up a lot of those traits.
Mm.
And what I talk about in the book, and it's kind of sort of the core of the work, is that Each of us has core wounds, right? So they are initial injuries of the psyche that happen in our formative years. And they can happen in our families, they can happen on the playground. We can even get these wounds vicariously from watching other people. But they are rejection, abandonment, humiliation, betrayal, and injustice. And as a result of those wounds, we wear a corresponding mask. So if you have a rejection wound, the mask you wear is avoidance. If you have a betrayal wound, the mask you wear, for example, is control. And so all of us have these initial injuries of the psyche. And when we build our ambition or our desire for success is coming from those places, it's going to be extra wobbly. And I think as immigrants or as a person of color, right, those wounds might feel a little different or they might feel a little exaggerated or exacerbated. And so we just want to look at that original injury of the psyche and see where it's driving our relationship to success.
Yeah, absolutely. So there, I think there's a lot of women who look successful on paper, but they feel completely depleted, empty, exhausted inside. So why do you think that so many of us fall for this hustle trap? And how can we start to break free from this?
Yes. So, one of the things that I really wanted to redefine in the book was like, what does ambition mean in general, right? So, like, I think ambition means a desire for more life, a wish to unfold, a wish to grow, which is neutral and natural. And it's inherent in every living thing on the planet, from our plant babies to our human babies. But we live in a world that says ambition is more for more sake all the time. It's
Mm,
more money, more power, always stretching, always moving the goalpost. And I think that's the piece that is really dysfunctional. I actually think ambition goes in cycles, kind of like how nature does, right? So you have this seedling of desire, you want to grow and you nurture your inner and outer environment. And because you do, you have this beautiful momentary peak in the sun. And then the seasons change and the petals fall off and you wind down and you go back underground where you rest until you're ready to take aim again. But so few of us actually let ourselves go in cycles. We're always stretching more for more sake because that's what's culturally reinforced. In the book, I also talk about something called the ambition penalty. So if you're a woman, a person of color, an immigrant, a person with disability, there's all these internalized messages that we have about ourselves and around taking up space that often initiates an impulse to work even harder,
mm,
right? Which then exacerbates the hustle, exacerbates the burnout.
yeah. Yeah, I feel like I wish that you had existed when I was in the throes of my career because I found myself always toggling between almost like too much and not enough. The both of those feelings of just like,
Yes.
how does that show up in our careers and businesses? Can you kind of talk us through like what that could look like?
Yeah, so that was a theme that I was seeing across the board with myself and with my clients, right? So if you're a woman, you're told to take up space, but when you speak truth to power, you're told, hey, that's inconvenient. Or if you're a person of color, when you speak your truth in an organization, maybe you're told that's not real. Or if you have a disability, you're told to throw your hat in the ring, but these basic accommodations aren't set up for you, which then further exacerbates illness, injury, and disability. So we're told to, hey, show up and do the thing, but you're not supported in the right way. So we're told to be and not to be in the very same sentence.
Yeah.
And this causes a double bind or a push pull. And then we internalize a lot of these messages and we weaponize them against ourselves, right? Of like, who am I to take up space? Or I'm too much. Let me water myself down. And so we have to rewrite all of these narratives and these scripts to give ourselves permission to show up.
Yeah. I found that oftentimes when I talk to women of color who have left the workforce to go out and build something of their own, one of the recurring themes is this idea that we felt like we couldn't be ourselves, right? There's
Yeah.
this expectation that you fit into this very specific box, this very specific definition of professional.
Mhm.
And I think professional spaces in general can be very like exclusionary and clicky, especially for women of color. So, how can ambition thrive in those environments so that we're focusing on community over competition?
I love that question. There's actually a body of work about the bias of professionalism standards, and it did inspire my framework on painful versus purposeful ambition. Because I think in a lot of organizations, we're told to be individualistic versus collaborative, to instrumentalize our minds and bodies to get to the goal versus working more harmoniously with them. And so there is a lot of bias in those professionalism standards that causes us to water ourselves down, to code switch. But I spoke to so many women of color and other people of color as I was researching the book. And so much of the time, that watering ourselves down, the trying to make ourselves palatable actually ends up making us sick. So
Mm,
I met a lot of people that had stories like I did. Ultimately, I believe that the work starts with us. I don't think it's just about us, right? I think there's nuance here, because I think sometimes we're told to fix ourselves versus fixing the places where women work, right?
Yeah.
I think that it always starts with us, though, because if we do that work on the inside, we show up differently. Then
Hmm.
everybody that is around us, then they show up differently because we're in a dance with everybody, right?
Mm.
And then I think that's how we can start to impact an organization. But I don't want to make it sound so reductive and say it's just about doing the work at the individual level, because it requires system change too.
Yeah, absolutely. There's only so much that we can do from an individual standpoint. I think the more leaders that we have that are diverse in their experience and their background and their culture, the more welcoming and the more collaborative environment we'll find ourselves, hopefully, in the corporate setting. So,
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
we need more badass women who are out here changing the game from the top down, essentially.
Exactly. And there's space for us all.
Yes. Okay, so oftentimes we see that burnout often hides behind ambition, right?
Mhm.
So, how can you tell if your drive is actually killing you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there will be signs, right? There were a lot of signs for me. But a lot of the times when we are sort of experiencing burnout or we're trending towards burnout, there's a couple of signature themes. So we might start to feel distance from our work. So things that we used to love and be really excited about, maybe now we feel distance around. Maybe we used to be like thrilled to get out of bed in the morning and go do that thing. And now we're having a really hard time getting started. We might also have sort of negativism and cynicism towards our coworkers, clients, and other constituents that we used to care about. And then we may have physical symptoms too, right? Everything from digestive issues to back issues to brain fog. And so I think it's really important that we check in and like how we're feeling about our work, how we're feeling in our bodies, and noticing if there's any trends, right? Did it used to be that way? Is this something that's new? What's the context that contributed to that? And just constantly be checking in.
Hmm.
The biggest thing for me is I think we get our lessons when we get our lessons, but I don't want people to have such a deep rock bottom like I did. Hopefully,
Yeah.
people can get the lessons in a gentler way and not to have such an extreme version of burnout. So, looking for those smaller signs along the way. And if you're feeling a lot of friction, are there things that you can do to shift that?
Yeah. I think oftentimes there is this fear of speaking up when you are experiencing burnout. It's almost like you are ashamed or you're afraid that if you say like I can't handle this, then you'll be seen as a weak team member, you'll be replaced. And I actually have a client who I just found out that she got a put on FMLA by her therapist
Mm,
because she
wow.
was exhibiting really intense signs of burnout to the point where she developed shingles.
Mm,
And so it's one of the things that she mentioned was she cried when the therapist was like, I'm gonna give you a break from this because this
mm,
environment is obviously having a really harmful impact on you. And she was like, I felt like for the first time I had permission to rest.
oof, yeah.
And I think many of us have this internalized, if we rest, then everything that we've built up until this point just goes away, it disappears, we have to start from scratch. How
Yeah.
can we reframe that mindset to like I guess like reframe how we think about rest and the importance of it in our ambitious goals?
Yeah. Really resonate with your client. I actually had an interview a couple of weeks ago. I was doing a little book club, and it was someone that knew me in that time of my career when the doctor called and said, "Your day's away from organ failure." And she's like, "Amina, I was close to you. I was your friend, and I didn't know this story."
Wow.
And I was like, "Yeah, because I felt so much shame around it at the time. Like, I didn't feel like that was something that I could put on blast and tell everybody. I felt like it was a weakness. I was like,
Yep.
why am I getting sick and nobody else is? Like, there must be something wrong with me." So I think a lot of the times we turn that on ourselves and we weaponize it against ourselves. But I think a lot of the times why we feel like we need permission to rest is, one, we live in a world that almost necessitates us being in constant momentum, right? We look at social media, we see everybody's highlight reel, and then we think, well, if I slow down, I'm going to fall behind. And I think that there's some scarcity mindset in there. And there's also systemic pieces too, right? Certain people actually have to overwork to close the racial wealth gap, the gender wealth gap. That's real and true. But I think for a lot of us, it is a bit of a mindset, right? If I take this break, I'm going to fall behind. I remember when I was in high school, somebody once said to me, a day off is a day wasted when others become better than you. And
Mm,
that stayed in my mind. And then as I was having my own reckoning with ambition, I was like, I I feel like I might have been living that way, right? And I
Yeah.
was like, oh my gosh, how awful that I'm treating myself that way, right? Because actually, in rest and recovery periods is where we get all of the beautiful inspiration, the new ideas, the $1 million ideas. And let me give you an example, because a lot of the times people are like, yeah, you're telling me to rest. Great. But Olympians actually have Olympic sleep coaches in what's lovingly known as sleep doping, because they
Wow.
understand, yeah, because they understand how important rest and recovery is to their highest and best performance.
Mm.
And what if we, as people in the workplace, in corporate America, or in our entrepreneurial journeys, operated the same way, where we recognize that actually sleep and rest are such essential pieces to highest yield contributions, that we really built those in and honored them.
Can we have that ideal situation in this world of capitalism and, your value being tied to productivity? Like, is that a realistic goal for us to have as a society?
Rest?
Yeah, just like the understanding the fundamental importance of it.
I think it is, right? Okay, listen, I think capitalism is all kinds of broken, right? Unfortunately, it's here and we're operating in it, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, I see a lot of people trying to operate in more conscious capitalism, and I don't think we have a new way of being just yet. So we're in this almost interstitial space where we see how much capitalism is broken and how extractive and depleting it is. But I think we don't know what's next yet, right? And so I do think that there are ways to cultivate pockets of rest and recovery. I think in some systems it's a little harder than others. Like, I'm an entrepreneur, so I have the privilege of baking that in, right? I'm coming off of my book tour, which was a very busy time, but I've baked in a lot of rest this summer, but I have that privilege. But I
Hmm.
work with a lot of people that are in corporate, and we find ways to build rest and recovery into that framework, into that structure of corporate, right? So sometimes it looks like they can take a sabbatical or they can take medical leave. Sometimes it looks like building rest into the day really strategically. It looks like
Yeah.
boundary setting. And so I think we just have to get clear on what's possible in our world and make the best that we can until we journey toward the post capitalistic era.
Yeah. I like to remind folks like you're not getting an award for being the most exhausted, burnt out
Nope.
anything.
Nope.
There's no prize for this. There's no competition that I would enter where, you know, uh I want anything to do with that. So doing simple things like using all your PTO, y'all. Like
Exactly.
this is part of your benefits
Right.
package. Stop
Take your
giving up
lunch
your
break.
time that you have literally been given because you have this warped sense of like, oh my God, I'm so important. The world is going to stop spinning if I take some time off. There will always be
Exactly.
more shit to do.
There will always be more to do. Like, take your lunch break, take breaks during the day, take your vacation, all of it. And you
Yeah.
know what you said? You're like, there's no award for being the hardest working, being the most burnt out.
Yeah.
Also, it comes with a big bill. Let me tell you, like, getting sick was one of the most expensive experiences of my life.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
a great reminder, y'all. So for somebody who is listening right now, who is ready to stop chasing and start living, what would you recommend their first move be so that they can start kind of shifting that narrative for themselves?
Not to plug the book, but the book is a really great place. So, really starting with those core wounds and understanding the wound that is driving your hustle. So, which one, two, three, or all five of those core wounds are really driving you? So, I have a rejection wound, I have a betrayal wound. So, I would often seek out a lot of experiences to try to make myself feel better around those things. But you can't, like, all the things on the external will never be enough to solve for the thing that's on the internal. So, picking
Hmm.
up the book and kind of working through those core wounds is really helpful. And then in the book, there's a framework on painful ambition versus purposeful ambition. So, painful ambition is driven by the core wounds. Purposeful ambition is connected to our truth and to our purpose. And so, noticing where and in what context you're in painful versus purposeful, and then really intentionally cultivating that purposeful ambition. There's a 5-step process in there that help you get really clear on how to do purposeful work and what your zones of genius are and how to live with more contentment.
Mm. I am so excited to dive into this book. I'm curious, Amina, if you could go back and give your younger overachieving self one piece of advice, what would it be?
I get this question a lot, and I'm just like, I could tell her anything, and I don't think she would have listened, right? It's like she had to get
It's
her
a great point.
lesson. I mean, I wish that I could tell her and that she would hear that everything's going to work out, that I'm right on time for my life. I'm in no rush. There's no hurry. Build a strong foundation, right? But she was in such a rush. She was in such a hurry. I think it would have fallen a little bit on ears that couldn't hear it.
Yeah. I'm curious because, this is a money podcast, and I've heard a lot of sentiment for folks who are like, I am exhausted by this career. I am burnt out. I want to make a change. I want to make pivots, but I also have financial obligations,
Mhm.
right? I don't have the ability to just quit my job and go on an eat, pray, love journey and discover my life's purpose. Like, I got kids and bills and a mortgage,
Yeah.
and what the hell am I supposed to do in order to start breaking free from this cycle? What do you say to that?
Yes. So, because I work with a lot of women and other historically excluded people, I am very sensitive to the money piece, right? Because we're experiencing a wage gap or a racial wealth gap. And so we have to, it's like you can't just jump off the cliff and, go on the eat, pray, love year. It's not possible for most folks. So, a couple of things. First and foremost, if you can create a money parachute for yourself, like the emergency fund or the fund that would let you take off some time, that's amazing because money buys you time, buys you options. The second thing is I'm never an advocate from jumping from the frying pan into the fire. A lot of
Mm,
us want to leave the current reality because it's not working, but unless we understand our role in it in place, we're going to take it to the other place or the next spot because everywhere we go, there we are, right? I remember saying to my therapist like over a decade ago, I was like, I just want to move to the woods, but I bet if I moved to the woods, I'd make myself the mayor of the woods and I'd have the same challenges, right? So everywhere we go, there we are. So see what you can learn in place about yourself, about what's not working, about your style, about your manager's style, all the things that don't work for you.
mm, mhm.
And then get really clear on your zones of genius because our zone of genius is our highest yield contribution. It's a place that we're off the charts brilliant, where our gifts are innate, where we can make the most money in the shortest amount of time and using the least amount of energy, which is a really compelling thing, right?
Mm, mhm.
And so getting clear on what your zone of genius is and how you might want to leverage that moving forward, and then charting out a plan for yourself about where that could be the biggest asset, whether that's an entrepreneurship, another corporate role, etc. And then
Yeah.
sometimes I think also like I'm a big fan of the MVP, right? So if you decided, hey, I'm staying in my current role in corporate, right? Doesn't feel right to jump into the next thing. I'm thinking I might want to try on for size a bit of an entrepreneurial venture. Well, how can you MVP it? What's the minimal viable product that you could test while you have the safety of your job, your day job, see if there's viability before you decide to exit. So how can you create as much safety for yourself and do as much planning as possible before you remove a safety net?
Yeah. I would probably also add that it's okay to ask for space and for help,
Yeah.
because I think a lot of what contributes to this feeling of burnout and exhaustion and overwhelm is this type A characteristic that I definitely have had to work on, of just like thinking I can do it all, and
Yeah.
superwoman syndrome, right? So
Yes.
for folks who feel like that they don't even have the capacity to make space for making changes in their life, I think it's probably because you just have way too much stuff on your plate, and it's time to, put some boundaries in place. But that's easier said than done. So when it comes to setting boundaries, like, what's your best advice so that you can get the space to first get the clarity to understand that you need the change, and then also make the strategic plan?
Yes, I love that you brought up the needs piece because I think for so many of us, we move through life without our needs met. And if you asked us, so many of us don't even know what our needs are. Like that was a reckoning for me. I was like, I feel so under resourced. And it's like, well, you never ask for help. You don't even know where you need help, right? So it's such an honest conversation that we need to have with ourselves. And it's so vulnerable to
Yeah.
receive. Most of us are so used to giving, right? But
Yeah.
vulnerability in receiving is really challenging for a lot of us. So thank you for bringing that up. When it comes to boundaries, I love the quote from Prentice Hemphill that is, "Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously." And
Ooh,
I
that's
it's
good.
good, right? And then in the work context, I think it's that boundaries are the distance at which I can honor you and me simultaneously. Because I
Mm-mm.
think a lot of the times when we think about setting a boundary, we're like, how can I keep this other person out, right? They're doing something that I don't like. I need to like put up a fence. But actually, it's a structure and a framework that facilitates the highest and best of both involved, which I think even just that pivot of thinking it that way opens things up for people so tremendously. So
Yeah.
so starting with that pivot around how we think about boundaries, and then where are the places that we need to establish some, right? So where are we feeling overwhelmed? Where are we feeling under supported? Where are we tolerating things that we need not be tolerating that we want to raise the standard on? That's usually an indication of a place where we want to have a conversation around a boundary. And then
Hmm.
setting them with love. I think is also really important. Again, because it's not that vehicle to keep other people out, it's a vehicle of facilitation.
Yeah, absolutely. Boundaries can help you have the actual capacity to like pour into the things that you care about more because you're not coming from a place of depletion. And I
Exactly.
found that the more that I ask for help, the better version I am, the better I can show up for the things that I care about.
Exactly. Exactly. So beautifully said.
Yeah. So how do you personally define success now after everything that you've been through? Because I'm sure it's completely different than previous versions of you.
Yeah. So I have a whole section on the book that's about contentment. So how I define success now is a sense of contentment. And a lot of people are like, how do you have ambition and contentment sitting side by side? Like they're kind of short circuit around that concept. Well, because a lot of us chase joy and happiness, but those are emotions and those are fleeting, right? So, like, actually, we're not meant to have them in a stable way. We're supposed to allow them to flow like all other emotions. But contentment is stable. Contentment from Eastern traditions translates to English as unconditional wholeness or knowledge of enough. And I think that's so beautiful, right? How can I
Yeah.
move through life with this internal knowledge of enough, this internal unconditional wholeness, regardless of what's happening around me? So,
Hmm.
success for me is if I can cultivate that sense of unconditional wholeness.
Ooh, I'm going to need all the quotes from this episode on the wall because you are really reframing the entire idea of ambition for me. And I know for our listeners. So, what do you hope that readers are going to take away from your book, The Ambition Trap?
My biggest hope is that people start to use the language of purposeful ambition and they start to see like, hey, in this old paradigm, we most of us were operating in this painful way. There is another way that can be good for self, good for the people that we care about, and good for the planet. And that's purposeful ambition. And I hope that they start to show up in that work. Then other people are inspired by how they're showing up in it. So there's a ripple effect. And by virtue of that, it might sound corny, but I hope we change the world.
I think that's an ambitious goal in itself, and I'm excited that you're at the helm of that conversation.
Oh.
So I would love for you to tell us where we can find you, where we can find the book, and where we can continue to hear and experience all of your goodness.
Thank you so much for having me and for such a rich conversation. I've loved
Absolutely.
this. You
Thank you.
can learn more about me on my website, AminaAlTai.com. I'm sure the spelling will be in the show notes and on Instagram at Amina AlTai. And you can get my book everywhere you buy books. So whether that's your favorite local indie bookstore, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, it's everywhere.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here and for giving us permission to reframe the idea of ambition, that it doesn't mean that you need to chase something that honestly I don't even think most of us really want, which is just like the accolades, the titles of success. I think we're just oftentimes seeking validation,
Yeah,
And at the end of the day, I have found that the only person who can provide that for me is me.
I know.
And I'm excited for folks to get their hands on this book and to really reframe their relationship with the hustle culture, with the ideas of success, and understand that the real success is alignment and purpose and showing up as the best version of yourself. So, thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you so much for having me. So beautifully said. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Thanks so much.